Hello everyone, you're back here with me, Stephanie, for Wokingham Borough Libraries, and I'm joined today by Ashley Harrold, otherwise known as AF Harrold, to talk about his fiction books at the moment. And this is going to be coming out as part of our Summer Reading Challenge series. So, hello Ashley, can you...
Hello, Steph. Hello. It's me. I've got a thing in my ear. I can hear you. I can see you.
That's
All
good.
is good.
That's
Sorry,
good.
I interrupted. You were just saying hello, and I just started talking. Sorry.
No, that's
Sorry,
fine.
everybody who's upset that I'm
They're
just...
they're not interested in me. They're interested in you.
Okay.
Thank you for taking the time out to talk to me today.
It's okay.
So, can I just ask you to tell the people watching a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing?
I could. Hello. So I'm AF Harrold, and I write mainly for kids. Storybooks and poetry, and I guess it all began with the poetry, which will be focused on in another video, but that's where I began with my writing as a teenager, writing awful teenage poetry, going black albatrosses of doom, dreadful stuff. And every now and then I'd write a poem that was a little bit funny, and I'd make these photocopied booklets I used to spend my teenage years in Horsham Public Library, dutifully pumping coins into the photocopier machine there, getting a librarian to come and deal with the paper jam, and then taking home wadges of photocopied poems, folding them, stapling them into little booklets of poems that I gave out. I was an awful you'd have hated me as a teenager if you'd known me, because the poetry was bad. But every now and then there was a funny poem in there, and somebody actually said, "Oh, I quite like that poem," and they actually meant it instead of what they said about all the other poems. Well, that's interesting. And I carried on writing poems and writing more funny poems because I got into performing, into open mics and poetry slams, and doing a lot of performance poetry and a lot of sort of funnier poems and comedy and cabaret there. And eventually the day came that I needed to earn some money. I don't know if any of you have ever done this. I had to earn some money. I'd been working in a bookshop for years. I've been working in the Blackwells in Reading and Kings Road, opposite the Central Library. The library is still there, thankfully, but the Blackwells is long gone. You can get your hair cut there, which obviously I haven't been doing because we're recording this sort of towards the end of the lockdown, so we're still looking like this. But that bookshop closed, and I was left kicking my heels going, what do I do now? I'll have a go at being a professional poet. And it turned out one of the ways that you can earn money as a poet is by going into schools and running poetry workshops and poetry slams and things. And so I was going into schools, doing a few of these, and I thought, what I need to do, I need to write some kids' poems that I can perform in schools, instead of trying to do the sort of slam poems that I've been doing, which were a bit weirder and a bit more grown up and a bit stranger. Write some poems for kids. And it turned out that I was all right at that, and they enjoyed it and I enjoyed it. And that carried on doing more of that. And eventually I wrote what was the first of my kids' novels, which was a book called Fizzlebert, Stump, the boy who ran away from the circus and joined a library. So lots of libraries in this story already. And that got picked up by a publisher. Tried a few different publishers, and one of them picked it up and asked me to write some more. And here, getting on for 10 years later, that was 2011, I wrote that, and it got picked up by Bloomsbury. Almost 10 years later, I've written about a dozen kids' novels and a couple of books of poetry. I'm still going into schools, not right now, obviously, because it's 2020 as we record this and we're all locked down, but going into schools and doing poetry and talking to kids there. So that's how I ended up as a children's author doing this. through a series of odd circumstances that I never planned. I think this is a really important thing. I never planned to be here. I ended up here, and I looked around and went, do you know what? I quite like it here. It's fun. It's such a lovely area of literature to be
And you can feed your
living
cats.
in. And I can afford to feed my cats, fortunately, Susan and Vincent. And not only that, but children's literature is such an important little world to live in as well, because the books you make, the books you're writing, are actually more important than people think.
Give them credit
when
for.
They just sort of go, oh, children's literature or children's books. Lots of people don't say literature, do they? Kids' books. There's actually something really vital. I imagine we'll touch on those, the vital, important bits of children's writing in a bit. So, Stephanie, was that answer enough for you?
That was a brilliant answer. I won't have to ask you that next time when we have a chat in a bit about your poetry.
No.
I'll have to find a different question for you.
That's all right. We can. We'll just read some poems. It'll be fine.
That might be a really good idea. You touched on the Fizzlebert Stump series, and I'd like to just ask a little question about that. So can you just give us an overview or an idea of the series for those who haven't come across Fizzlebert Stump yet?
I think I can. Do you know what? I think I can. As I said, about 10 years ago, I had an idea. It was one of those times you go into bed and you're lying in bed and your brain's a bit woo, and an idea pops up, and you need to get out of bed and go to your desk and write it down. Otherwise you'll not get to sleep, or it'll just vanish and evaporate. And the next morning I woke up and I went into my office, and on my desk, on a sheet of paper in very bad handwriting, because I did it in the dark without my glasses on, I found a bit of paper that said, "A boy runs away from the circus and joins the library." And I thought, well, that'd be a good poem. Funny little poem, isn't it? Because it sort of turned around. And then I thought, well, what if I actually tried writing a story? And so I started writing this story about this boy called Fizzlebert Stump, who lives in a travelling circus. And Fizz is the son of Mr. Stump, who's the circus's strong man, and his mum, Mrs. Stump, Gloria Stump, who's one of the circus's clowns. And her clown name is the Fumbling Gloriosus, because she's really good at dropping things. You give her anything, she can drop it. You hand her a teapot, dropped. You hand her a book, dropped. You hand her a goldfish, drop. You know, but she doesn't just drop. Don't give her a goldfish. She doesn't just drop them. She drops them in such a graceful, amusing, comedic. You just think, oh, there's a lady who knows how to drop things. And in the first book in the series, which is called Fizzlebert Stump, the boy who ran away from the circus and joined the library, Fizz finds a library book that a visitor to the circus has dropped on their way out, and he picks it up and he finds that it's due back the next day. And the man who teaches him his history classes, Dr. Surprise, the circus's illusionist and mind reader, explains to Fizz a little bit of what libraries are, because Fizz is in a travelling circus, moving from town to town to town every week, doesn't have a library card, has never been to a library. And he finds out that this book's due back the next day. You'll get fined if it's not back. Oh no, someone's going to get in trouble. And he learns the library's just by the park where the circus is parked up. And so he decides off his own bat to take this back to the library, and he goes off and he hands it in the library, and he discovers from the librarian what an amazing place. All these books, right? I don't know if you know this, Steph, all these books, you can just take them. You can just borrow. Do I have to pay for them? No, you don't have to pay for them.
No.
Well, I can borrow this book. Yeah. And so Fizz gets a little pile of books, and then, as you say, the problem arises. He doesn't have a library card. But he's given a form that he can fill in. His parents can sign it, get a library card easy enough. But he's in a little bit of a bind because he's not told anyone at the circus he was going to nip to the library. And if he goes back and says, "Can you fill this in?" they'll go, "What were you doing leaving the park without telling anyone? Because you shouldn't be doing that."
Mm.
And two old people who happen to overhear this conversation offer to fill the form in, pretend to be his grandparents.
Oh.
So they do. And then they kidnap him and they blackmail him and they take him back to their house and force him to do the cleaning. And their house is disgusting. And eventually, Fizz escapes from Mr. and Mrs. Stinkthrottle, this pair who've taken him back to the house and forced him to do all the cleaning and tidying. And he gets back to the circus. I won't tell you how that happens because that's the story, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got to read the book.
But there are 5 more books. Yeah, there are 5 more books with other adventures of Fizz in there. Fizzlebert, Stump, and the Bearded Boy. Fizzlebert, Stump, the boy who cried fish. Fizzlebert, Stump, and the girl who lifted quite heavy things. Fizzlebert, Stump, the boy who did PE in his pants. And Fizzlebert, Stump, and the Great Supermarket Showdown. And all 6 of those books, there's only 6. There aren't any more, so you can collect the set. Photocopy, buy them from your library. Doesn't make sense, does it? But they're all comedies. You can read each one on its own. They're all stories by themselves.
And people can get them through your website,
they're quite
stupid.
They? Sorry, Steph?
People can get copies of the books through your website.
They can, yeah. www.afharroldkids.com. Buy signed copies. Harold has 2 R's in the middle. That's all you need to know. But they're funny, zany, madcap adventures that anyone would enjoy if they had a sense of humour at all. Here's the first one. I'll just read you a little bit here. So this is page 94. Just opened up at page 94. Fizz nodded. So if you like books with nodding in, this is clearly that is the quality of prose, the quality of the writing in this book. Some of the sentences just 2 words long, but sometimes that's all you need. All these authors who use really long sentences, sometimes just 2 words. Fizz nodded. Yes.
Yeah. So people need to find out about Fizzlebert, Stump if you haven't already.
Yeah.
One of the other series that you do is Greta Zargo. Now, I think she's for slightly older.
We say series. There's 2 books. There's 2 books.
I would call that a series,
but it's a short series.
Okay.
Yeah, a series enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
And these 2 books. Oh, go on. Sorry, you had a proper question.
I do have a proper question. Greta Zargo has been described as a mix between Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Goth Girl by Chris Riddle. So can you tell us about Greta and your inspiration for these books?
Greta Zargo. These 2 books, Greta Zargo and the Death Robots from Outer Space and Greta Zargo and the Amoeba Monsters from the Middle of the Earth, are something that's slightly rare in kids' books and in books in general. They're they're science fiction comedies, and there's not enough sci-fi comedy out there in the world. We think of Hitchhikers, we think of Red Dwarf, and then we Cakes in Space, the Reeve and McIntyre book. But there's not a lot of good quality sci-fi comedy. And so Douglas Adams was sort of obviously a thought in the brain there. And they're a slightly more sophisticated comedy than the Fizzleberts, perhaps, but they're still very, very silly, still very funny. Lots of ideas in there. Greta's an 11-year-old schoolgirl come investigative reporter for the local newspaper. And in the first book, cakes have gone missing all around the town she lives in. And she's trying to find clues to not only find who's been nicking the cakes, but also get herself the big scoop for the front page of the newspaper. But at the same time that Greta's trying to track down the serial cake thief. And when I say serial cake, I don't mean a cereal cake thief. I mean a serial cake thief, like a serial murderer, but
like
with more
someone
cakes.
who keeps stealing cakes rather
Yeah, yes, rather than someone who's focusing on cornflake cakes. Yeah. But at the same time that that story is going on with Greta, there's another story that interleaves with it about these robots that are traveling across the galaxy, encountering brand new alien planets, learning all about everyone who lives there, taking lots of data and photos and things, and then blowing the planets up, killing everyone and building a load of new robots and sending them out to new star systems, technically von Neumann machines, self-replicating robot probes. And they've arrived in this book at the planet Earth. And the only thing that can stop them from logging everything on the Earth and blowing us up and making new robots out of all the raw materials there is Greta. But she doesn't realize this because she's too busy trying to work out who's been nicking the cakes. And whether Greta actually manages to save the planet Earth at the end of this book, I'm not going to tell you because that would spoil it. However, you can read the sequel, Greta Zargo and the Amoeba Monsters from Middle of the Earth, which may give you a hint. And this one's got a bit more James Herbert horror feel to it rather than the science fiction. But they're both girl-led, crime-solving, sci-fi comedy capers, whodunits with cake and wisdom and weird inventions, and I'm really fond of them. I like them a lot. I think they did what they wanted to do.
Yeah,
there, and I hope they find readers out there, because I think there are going to be some weird kids out there for whom this is going to be exactly the thing that they want, and a load of kids who'll read it and go, "What?" And that's absolutely fine.
I think the really good thing about kids is that if they just read everything and they take in everything, and it doesn't matter whether we think it's weird as adults, because as long as the kids like it, it's fine.
There's that. There's also the fact that not every book is for every reader.
Exactly.
And what is nicer as a reader, whether a grown-up or a kid, to find a book that nobody else knows about, find a book that maybe other people have read and they said to you, "No, didn't really think much of that," and you read it and you go, "Do you know what? This is
the one.
A hole in me that I didn't know there was.
Exactly.
This is perfect." And it doesn't matter nobody else likes that, or nobody else. That's the book for you, and that is such a amazing feeling, finding those books that are just for you. And I think there'll be some readers for whom Greta will be that.
Greta could be the open door to Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams and James Herbert and
all sorts of places you wouldn't necessarily find yourself
H.G. Wells. Could go anywhere.
Absolutely.
You could just, that's the book for you. So we all need to go and check out Greta as well. I mean, my book list is getting longer now. this shopping basket I'm building on your website is going to be huge.
Well, I tell you what, Stephanie, you could just borrow them from the library.
Well, that as well.
That's entirely free for you, the reader. And there are probably people watching this who don't realise about PLR, public lending rights, which is a payment that writers and illustrators of books get when people borrow their books from the library. So it's free for you, but all those borrows, all those loans from libraries are noted down, and at the end of the year, they're divided up, and the writers and illustrators of those books get a little payment from the government, organised through the British Library now, isn't the PLR?
I think so,
office.
Yes.
And so never ever, because you sometimes see this on Twitter, people feel guilty that they've not bought your book.
Yeah.
They feel guilty. They want to support you, but we all know times are tight at the moment. They want to support you and they go, "Oh no, I'm really sorry. I borrowed it from the library." And you go, "That's brilliant. That's amazing because it's helping keep our libraries alive,
Oh yes.
and everyone who borrows a book or uses any of the other services in the library is helping keep their local libraries going if you're lucky enough to still have one.
Yeah.
And you're also supporting the writers and readers of those books
And
at
also
no cost to
you've got
you. So
all these amazing librarians who might know other things you would like to read if you like.
yeah, there is such a fount of knowledge available there. So many years of experience of simply being in a room with loads of books in. Some of that seeps into you. There's an
Yeah.
osmosis that's going on there. So cherish your librarians and cherish your libraries.
Yes.
And you're supporting not only them, but also the writers and illustrators of the books that, frankly, we need to feed our cats to make these things. And you're helping us do that.
Indeed. So when obviously Wokingham libraries are back open again, you can definitely come in with your library card and borrow any book.
Yeah.
But if you're particularly taken by any we're talking about today, come into the libraries and find out where they are on the shelves.
Even if you're not, even if you don't like the sound of these books, just pop one in your little pile of borrowed books. You
Yeah.
don't have to read it. Take it out, bring it back
we
a
need
fortnight
to feed
later.
the
It
cat.
still gets logged. That's
Yeah.
fine. I still get my payment, so everyone is happy there.
The cats still get fed.
Yeah, Vincent and Susan need their tea. Do you want to be the person responsible for my cats going hungry? Stephanie, shall I just quickly mention a couple, because we talked about some of the funny books, the Fizzlebert and the Greta. Shall I just
I was coming
before
to
we
the
finish?
Yeah, if
Some
you
of the
want,
more stranger, more serious books I've written for kids.
yeah, I was going to touch on the imaginary and the afterwards particularly, but I think you've got some others that fall into that.
Well, let me talk about those because they I just happen to have them here. The Imaginary and the Afterwards are two books that I did with an amazing illustrator called Emily Gravitt. And some of you, anyone with smaller kids will probably know, or even bigger kids will remember some of Emily's picture books that she's done. Little Mouse's Book of Fears and Meerkat Mail and Hare and Bear and all of these. And she's won the Kate Greenaway medal twice, which is the biggest award for illustrators in the UK.
Okay.
And I was privileged to work with Emily on these two books. The Imaginary and the Afterwards are both they're not comedies like the others we've talked about. They're spooky, strange stories. The Imaginary is about an imaginary friend whose real friend, the girl who's dreamt him up, gets knocked down by a car. And Roger, the imaginary boy, is left at the side of the road as he watches this ambulance drive off, and he doesn't know if she's alive or dead. And he begins to fade away because the person who imagined him is no longer there. And he gets rescued just before he fades away entirely by a cat called Zinzan, who spots him, because and I know cats can see things that normal human beings, grown-ups, can't see. Cats have this extra. So anyone with a cat at home will know the cat sometimes, and there's nothing there. We can't. The cat's seen something.
Yeah.
And Roger discovers that his friend Amanda, the real girl, isn't dead. She's in hospital, and he has to find his way back to her by finding people to sort of believe in him along the way. But while he's trying to find his way back, he's being hunted by a man called Mr. Bunting, who wants to eat him because he eats imaginary friends there. And so it becomes a sort of chase, adventure, spooky. And Emily has done the most amazing, creepy pictures in this book. When I'm visiting schools and talking to kids, and they say to me, or afterwards, parents complain to me, kids have had nightmares, and I say it's not my fault, it's Emily, because she's drawn pictures like this here. This is Mr. Bunting's imaginary friend, this girl here. And when you've got pictures like that, I don't want to go to, you don't want her stood at the end of your bed at 2 a.m.
Yeah, you might not want to read it at bedtime.
No, maybe.
Well, it depends how resilient or how
It,
brave.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's a good, moving, spooky adventure. And the afterwards is a little bit similar. Again, a book I did with Emily, and it's about two best friends, a girl called December and her best friend Happiness. And one of them has a dreadful accident, falls off a swing and hits her head and dies. A really quite serious,
Big.
stupid accident. There's
Yeah.
no
No
reason
reason
behind it.
for it.
These things happen. But her friend December, through a series of circumstances, finds her way into the afterworld, into the world of the dead, and finds her friend there in the world of the dead. And the story is about trying to find a way of bringing her back to the world of the living, where we are. So there's quite a dark story. Again, it's the sort of thing that's not going to be for everybody.
No.
But if you like something a bit creepy and something that's gonna, nobody I know who's read this has failed to end up in tears at some point. So it should be packaged with a handkerchief or something. It's pretty moving in that way. So people have told me. But again, it's for a specific reader. I don't know who that is, but there's somebody who that's going to be the right book. And of course, because of the subject, because of the story, the topic in there, there's going to be people for whom it's not going to be the right book, for people for whom it's going to be too close to the bone or too upsetting. And
not suitable.
We're fully aware of that, which is why I don't like to hide what it's about. I don't like to say, oh, well, read it and you'll find out it's quite a good book. I think there needs to be a trigger warning of some sort there. And it is a kid's book, but it's creepy and dark and moving and sad. And Emily's done the most amazing job with the art in this one too. So that's all I have to say about those, I think. She's amazing, Emily Gravett. And this autumn, if you're a Harry Potter fan at all, this autumn 2020, when we're recording this, Quidditch and what the little comic relief book, the Quidditch book.
Quidditch
Emily's
Through the Ages.
Quidditch Through the Ages. That's what it's.
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them.
So
the 2 books.
Yeah, and Chris Riddell did the Beadle the Bard.
Yeah.
As well last year. So this year, Emily's illustrated version of Quidditch Through the Ages, a great big hardback book with hundreds and hundreds of pages of her illustrations, because it was a very thin book that Joanne wrote there that they've made into that's coming out this autumn. That's going to be absolutely glorious and gorgeous because Emily is such a brilliant illustrator. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yes,
as well.
And don't forget, if you don't want to go out and buy it, you will probably be able to get it through the library.
Yeah, there might be a waiting list because it's going to be such a big, beautiful hardback thing. But if Harry Potter's your bag, there's a book for you to track down.
Indeed. So before we sort of round up the novel part of our chat, I have just a nice light-hearted question.
Ooh,
that if we had an audience, somebody might ask you.
Yeah.
This question is: if you joined the circus that Fizzlebert Stump came from, what would be your circus act and why?
Oh, now in Fizz's circus, excuse me, in Fizz's circus there is there's a strong man already, Fizz's dad. Fizz, the act that Fizz does in the first couple of books is he puts his head in the lion's mouth and then takes it out again without having had it bitten off. His mum's a clown. There's some acrobats. There's a man called Percy Late who has an act called Percy Late and his spinning plate. He's a plate spinner who can only do one plate at a time.
Okay.
I think that's still stretching my talents. I'm not sure I'd be. Do you know what I'd be? I'd be the ringmaster.
Oh.
Because one of the jobs I've done, being a performance poet, I've done a lot of comparing, a lot of introducing acts and introducing nights and telling you what's coming on next and what you just saw. And that's a job I can do pretty well. And so I think if I got myself a nice long red sort of velvet coat and a top hat, I could go out into the ring before any of the acts and drum up the enthusiasm in the audience and build the tension before the first act comes on. And I could say the names of the acts quite clearly. And so I would be the circus ringmaster, which is kind of what I am, writing the books all about the circuses, because I'm in charge of what happens in there. So circus ringmaster, Stephanie, that's me.
That would be a brilliant job.
Thank you.
That sounds really cool. Well, thank you, Ashley, for
it's my pleasure
to have this chat.
Always happy to talk to a librarian and to big up libraries and books. I mean,
well, we're going to have another chat shortly.
We're going to talk about poems, aren't we, in the other video?
We are going to talk about
I love talking about poems.
So you will see it. Well, I will see you in a minute, but everyone else, I will probably see you next week.
Okie doke. Bye, guys.
Thank you, Ashley.
Cheerio. Bye.
Bye.